Hello and welcome to Feedback, episode 44. We are very excited to be here today with not one, but two fantastic composers, Enno Poppe and Wolfgang Heiniger, who are going to be chatting with us. And we're also joined by the illustrious Nick DeMaison. And just to remind everyone at home, as you're watching, if you have questions, you can send them really at any time to feedback@yarnwire.org or join the live chat on YouTube and Facebook if you'd like to ask questions in real time. So today we're going to be talking about two different pieces. And before I kick that over to you, Nick, I just want to say really again how thrilled we are. We first worked with Wolfgang and Enno almost 8 years ago to present a collaboratively written work by them that we're going to talk about today, Neumond. And we just recently recorded a work by Wolfgang as well, Neumond, which we'll also be discussing today. So with that, I will kick it over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Laura. Enno, it's great to see you again. And Wolf, it's very nice to meet you in this strange realm that we're in. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, great pleasure.
So before we actually get into any conversation, we're going to play a bunch of pieces. And so if anyone is watching, I would strongly recommend listening on headphones or going to the trouble of setting up your 8-channel surround sound, because the recording has an incredible depth to it that on little tiny Apple computer speakers may not sound as good. I'm sorry if I just killed your Apple sponsorship, Yarnwire. By saying that.
I wish. It's okay.
So we talked with Enno back in episode 39. I wonder, Laura and Russell, maybe if you could talk about how this project unfolded, where you have a piece by Enno, a piece by Wolf, and a piece by the two of them together.
Yeah, take it away, Russell.
Sure. I mean, well, last time we talked about how we got to know Enno and his music, and then, the first large-scale concert that we did of his music was Neumond, which is this collaborative piece. And so both Enno and Wolf came over to Miller Theater, and we presented that concert. And like I said before, we really loved working with both of them, and commissioned Enno for a new piece. And the whole idea was to do this recording up at MPAC, and then it just made actually total sense that this collaborative piece that they wrote together, to then pair it with two single pieces by each composer, and rather than make a portrait CD, which is kind of like a typical type of thing, we ended up with this. It's hard to know what to call it, right? Because it's like a
double portrait.
But it's a portrait of like friends as composers. It's a portrait of friends as musicians and performers. It's really quite has a nice feel to it personally for me. Luckily, musically, it also really is pretty awesome, and flows well too. So I don't know. It just kind of made sense as a project.
Cool. Well, before we talk about it, let's listen to a little bit of the beginning of Neumond so that we can kind of know what we're talking about. Yeah, very cool. I love the sound palette that you're both working with, and I think the thing that's most striking is the relationship between acoustic and electronic sounds. I wonder if one of you could just speak a bit about how that works. I can call on individuals if I have to.
The principle is basically for all the piece, it's the same, with very, very few exceptions where it's actually a ring modulation, but it's basically just pitch shifters. So the keyboard that they would have on each key they press, they have a pitch shifter which shifts the pitch of the incoming percussion sounds by a certain amount. So they can immediately produce around, I think 40 voices at the same time if they need to, and in different pitches. But with this kind of technology we are using, which is so-called time domain pitch shifting, you have these artifacts. So the farther you pitch, the bigger the artifacts get. So this typical hissing sound in the high pitches. Hence the name actually Tonband, because there is a lot of sounds in there which remind of kind of the early sounds of tape manipulation sounds from the early 50s and 60s.
And Tonband is the German word for tape.
Exactly, yeah. Tonband is the German word for tape. I should have explained that. So, so it's this old. It has a lot to do with this old sound of tape manipulation sounds.
I think the trick of the piece is that the pianists, the keyboardists, don't have proper sounds. The keyboards are completely silent. That means they can't really practice the piece on their own because they play only with the percussion sounds. So that means the two percussionists, each of the percussionists has a slave, the person who plays the music behind and who manipulates the percussion sound. So it's in fact it's two duets. So one duet percussion and piano, and the other one percussion with piano, and that's what happens throughout the piece.
So that's I guess I have a few questions. One is, I mean, obviously it's a little ironic that you're calling it tape piece, but there's no tape and you're generating everything live. That's not really a question. That's just an observation that I think is funny. Can you talk about, so like when you're composing with, real instruments, you can explore the specific sounds of those instruments, but when you're working, as Wolf said, with something that's a little bit, malleable depending on exactly how it's manipulated on any given day with any given instrument. Can you talk about the process of composing for this instrument that's like more open-ended, that is maybe like less controllable? Is that true? Or is that true that it's less controllable?
No,
it's reliable.
It just needs a long phase where you build up experience. I mean, we had that. We had the great chance, the Musikfabrik, the basement, and the whole percussion setups, and we had the electronics. We were several days there just playing around.
Yeah, I think we checked all percussion instruments. That with the contact microphones, we put the contact mics on every instrument, and on these days we saw, okay, some of the sounds don't work, not so interesting or too complicated or whatever, and we have to filter in a way that we find, okay, first, these instruments are the most interesting. And I think Wolf and I, we had a really good time and much fun playing around, because that Wolfgang is a percussionist and I'm a pianist. So we had lots of just kind of playing together. That was kind of the starting point of the piece.
That's so cool. I don't think I realized that you were a kind of like yarn wire in miniature. And that you were sort of composing for like an expanded version of yourselves.
I was in my career. I was never as good as them in my career.
Me too.
Well, so that begs a question for Yarnwire. For you guys, they had this long period of exploration of sounds. Was there a similar process for you in discovering, the reliability of techniques and discovering the sound palette?
I'm going to say one thing with the Miller Theater one, we discovered our lack of great bell plates in the US, because the bell plates we used were made, you remember that? It was, I mean, we had aluminum ones that we found and we rented, and they just did not ring at all. And so for this recording, you notice they're much different bell plates.
Okay. Yeah.
We had some bell plates made by a guy in England who makes them, and he sent them over, and they're beautiful bell plates. So like for this recording, we were like, okay, if nothing else, we have to get this thing right. So we got that done. So that's one area of exploration that we did try. But we also have a secret that's now not going to be a secret. When we rehearsed, because we couldn't do the patch at first. Laura, maybe you want to explain like how you guys, what sounds you used.
Well,
I remember.
in the very like the very first time around, I do remember because we just had this sort of like, and we didn't want to get used to hearing, notes, because, obviously when Ning and I learned our parts, we learned it with a piano because that's what we had at home. And so we'd had a little, and it's, one of the things I appreciate so much about both of you is you write very idiomatically for the keyboard, even though it may not sound that way to the ear when you hear the result. So, it's like, oh, I'm, playing these really great 5-finger like patterns on the keyboard, fits so well in the hand. But then we didn't want to get used to that when we were rehearsing the first time together. So we just had this sort of like odd conglomeration of like noisy sounds that were coming through the keyboard.
General MIDI percussion sounds.
Yeah, and I think one of them was a dog barking for some reason. It was, very strange.
No, I think it's absolutely clear, because the problem of the piece is the setup is very complicated. You have the 25 contact mics, and it needs more than one day just to make the setup, and you can't move it anymore because afterwards the mics fall down, and you have to find again the points where to put it. And I think in Miller Theatre was the first time to really be able to rehearse the piece, because after having the setup, and normally for example, you can't play this piece on a tour because you never have enough time to make the setup.
Absolutely.
And we knew that that's a problem about the piece, but it's just worth trying it.
Yeah, and also it bears mentioning, it runs on a program called Max MSP, which is not exactly known for its robust nature as well.
Reliability. Yeah. I think we had to shut it down in the middle of the concert.
Your patch is pretty good.
Yeah.
Your patch is pretty good.
I think the patch is not the problem. I think the mics are the problem. So if you just, if the microphone is maybe 2 centimeters different, and the bell plates, the sound is completely different. Yeah. So finding the right points is really hard. And remember very well, that was the most hard.
Yeah.
That's a really great segue. Russell, maybe we could go to the second sound sample, and maybe we could have a look at the image of what the setup looks like.
Mm-hmm.
World in that domain of where we're listening to acoustic and electronic sounds combined, I think there's certain acoustic sounds that we're used to equating on a kind of like sliding scale of like, well, that's almost electronic, like the sound of like a super ball and a bass drum has like a nice kind of like electronic-ness to it, right? But what strikes me about this is how many of the like, hitting like a tempo block or like hitting a snare drum, and how seamlessly those sounds really blend into the electronic palette. I wonder if you could talk about your approach to kind of like finding that equilibrium between the acoustic and the electronic.
I think lots of that was first just trials. So we checked out instruments. I'm sure I think for the piece is more than half an hour, and I think the plan was to have chances of differentiation. So to have very different sounds. Now we have the very dry things, like some of the dry stuff is not, the modulation is not so obvious, and with the bell plates, sure, or with the big things, it's much more obvious. It's just about having a big amount of different possibilities for sounds to make the piece different.
I think so too. The key to it is actually the length of the piece, because you really have time to get used to and to understand all the differentiations. In a shorter piece, that would have been much more complicated. But it's really like a language you learn over the first few minutes. And there are also things we wrote with that in mind, so with certain patience. So you don't have to shoot very fast, so you take your time to explain an idea, to get the audience used to it.
And I think that was really one of the most interesting things in writing a piece together, because for sure you can't write all the details together, but making just the plan about writing the piece, for example, which instruments are in which part of the piece, the most important instrument, or like we spare the crotales here, we have the crotales later, so because if we have that at the beginning, we can't use it anymore at the end. Like the dramaturgy of the basic instruments. That was really interesting, and I think we had lots of discussions about that before we started to write the piece.
That's really sorry.
Yeah, there was actually some kind of master plan.
Yeah,
like a blueprint of the piece, where we knew that who is going to write which part.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because it kind of flips the ear cam model of composer engineer, like I am the composer and I write the organization and I structure the sounds, and I am the engineer and I solve the problems. Like you're kind of flipping that model on its head. Can you talk more about your collaboration? Like how you decided to work on such an involved piece together, and how that decision-making process worked for you? Because I think it is kind of unique in the electroacoustic composition world.
That we worked together for years before we started writing Tone Band, in that way that Wolfgang wrote several patches for me for 2 operas, and also for the piece Rad, what you played very often. I think Laura and Ning played that very often. That's with the Wolfgang patch. And at some point, I came to Wolfgang and said, I want to write a piece like this. And Wolfgang said to me, I want to write exactly the same piece, And at that point, that was perfect, because, okay, let's do it together. We had both the same idea, and we can do that together. And I think it was super helpful, just because just for the whole process. For example, for the experimentation phase, where it was really super important to be two people. Because no, you can't do this alone. You can't make a keyboard and playing the percussion at the same time, and because you need 2 people. And I think that was just a fantastic and really great fun to find out how and in which way you work together. It's like in rehearsals, you have to find it in a way, and for sure you have sometimes just that there are lots of surprises, because sure, if I would write the piece alone, it would be different, and that's just a great chance to be surprised.
Also, it was absolutely striking for us, even so for us, obviously it's pretty clear who wrote what. I mean, we immediately hear it, but this is because it's us. I was surprised how very, very few people understood who wrote what. So you really have to understand each other's music extremely good to hear it. Because we are using the same system. was a big surprise for me too, that a common blueprint and a common system and harmonic understanding, because there's a common harmonic process going on, or processes are so dominating even something like a personal language, that's pretty surprising. I don't know how even if you feel when it's switching from one composer to the other while playing.
I'm not sure that I did. I sort of read it as a I don't know. Not to say through composed, because it's clearly not through composed, but that the collaboration comes across in like a through composed way, where it's sort of constantly braiding itself between the two of you. I was not able to say like, this is clearly Enno and this is clearly Wolf. I wonder if Yarnwire was able to pick those out.
We had our theories.
Yeah, we placed bets.
But it's actually pretty. We never really wrote together on one part, so it's really. It stops at one point and it goes on the other. But in the end, it's a little bit different there. This second version, because there was a first version, this is the second version now. Mm-hmm. We did actually.
I think
I wouldn't be so sure anymore whether I could reconstruct which bar is one from whom.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good place to listen to another section. How about if we go to example 3, which is the transition between movement 2 and movement 3 out of 5 movements.
You picked my favorite part of the piece. Thank you.
That's really striking.
Yeah. In fact, that's interesting for me now, because the piece is it's 12 years ago when then we wrote it. So I think the farther it's away, the harder it's for me to remember everything. So if it's really clear which is the Wolfgang music and which is mine, because I think it's absolutely. It comes nearer and nearer. So I think it's that's interesting.
Well, so now I have a ton of questions.
That was a transition coming from Enno to Wolfgang.
Yeah.
Exactly, this part was a transition.
Yes. After you said that you had written such separate parts, I sort of guessed that the cascading stuff was Enno's, and then right. So but now I have 2 questions. One, like, is this kind of like a play on the idea of a slow movement with like the sirens sweeping in and then like coming on to this chorale? Okay. So with this funny chorale that starts the third movement, I guess I wasn't thinking very hard when I listened to it. I was just sort of like, okay, and then these synthesizers come in, but it's not being synthesized. You're doing that live, right?
Yeah, that's the siren. That's the siren which goes through the pitch shifters. So this is this weird organ you actually have to pump, because if they get the siren goes higher, the whole organ goes high, and vice versa.
Ah, okay. So that whole chorale is just being drawn out of the single sound of the siren.
Exactly.
I think it's so cool because you're right.
So
like
cool.
it's the physical nature of it. Like the siren is a pitch shifting instrument and it just keeps shifting, but then you have this process on top of it that's doing that stuff. So it's like the mechanical is moving the pitch, but also the electronics, which is I mean, it's great.
Yeah.
This was really very interesting because your siren was extremely different than the siren we used in Germany. But I don't remember exactly. So they were on the recording. They were first. I thought here are some sounds I never heard these before, but it's just the siren, so we can't really fix because the pitches are not fixed on the siren, so it's extremely different.
And I think actually back to the Miller one. I think the Miller one we had a little siren or something.
Yeah.
And that was a little underwhelming. We're like, meh. But then for the recording, kind of like the bell plates, we got an air raid siren that was, it's like up to my hip and just like cranking it.
So, Russell, how much Advil did you need after the 18 takes of the siren passage?
Thankfully, I don't play that part, so it's
Okay.
Ian's muscles. And but it's funny because you can let go of it, and it just goes on forever. Like that crank just keeps turning and turning. And at some point, we decided, do we fade this track out? Like, how are we going to stop this thing? Because it'll just keep going.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. That the encounter with different instruments creates such a different sound in the piece.
Yeah.
Could you also discuss, because the recording is, when you're listening to it on close headphones, it feels very spatially oriented inside the mix. Could you talk maybe a little bit about the different experience of the piece, hearing it live versus this really elegant, beautiful kind of constructed sound that you hear, that you're able to achieve at MPAC? I mean, I think I heard it live in 2013, but it's so deep in my memory that there's no way for me to compare the experience of having heard this piece 9 years ago to listening to it now.
I actually like the recording for its way of sort of projecting the physicality of the piece. I mean, it's not. I think it's six channel, right? Six or 8 channels. 6 channels are out there in the live version. So it's a pretty physical, broad wall of sound in the loud parts, and actually works pretty good in the recording. In my at least in my experience now.
It was a big question how to do
I
that.
didn't remember exactly, but there was kind of specialization in the patch itself. So I think the instruments are, it's not always, the woodblock is at the same place, but all the sounds are moving around. But I think it's automatized, but I don't remember
very slowly.
I think what we did was we took the outputs, in the hardware that would go to the speakers live, and each of those outputs was a separate track in the recording. And so we could decide how hard to pan it based on the diagram that's actually in the score. It is automated, but that was kind of like, well, how do we recreate this?
Oh, okay. So you were really striving to recreate the circumstances of the electronics in performance in the recording.
Yeah, because in performance, you can really hear when they're wide, and they're going. And so, those outer channels should be pretty far. And then the speaker placement kind of dictated a kind of, physical placement for the sound.
Yeah.
So cool. Maybe we can kind of turn our attention to Neumond. Is that an okay spot to transition? So this is the piece that Wolf wrote by himself for Yarnwire. And probably after having listened to those couple excerpts, now we will connect the Wolf-esqueness of the piece to that passage of Tonband. So this would be example 4.
Ding dong.
And I hate to like keep down the same line of questioning, but can we keep talking about the relationship between the electronic and the acoustic and how you're thinking about it in this piece?
Well, there is no live electronics here. There's just two synthesizers and two percussionists. There is no treatment of sound in any way. So they are in two different worlds. And so I mean, as the idea of the word Neumond, that's new moon. You say that new moon, as it's completely dark. So it's kind of a goth piece, because that's what I liked. Actually, yeah, of course, it's a reminiscence to the siren organ, kind of, as the glissando. I didn't want to make it too obvious, since it's on the same record. And I knew I wrote this piece especially because I was asked, we have another 10 minutes. Can you write 10 minutes? I said, okay, I'll write 10 minutes. And it should have had to do something. There should be a connection. So it's the glissando. And I always had with my association with the siren and this organ was always kind of. I heard the Nautilus or I don't know whether that's known, Jules Verne's. What's the Captain Nemo? It's that Captain Nemo, right? Yeah. With its organ and Graf Dracula and this kind. I always had this association when you played that part in Neumond. So I wanted to do a piece just for Graf Dracula, basically, in Neumond. And so it's kind of genre. it's a character piece, if you want so. Yeah. Be played in a cloak, maybe even with at least the mental long teeth and some old blood. And I had a lot of fun writing it. So it's a total different approach, of course, because there is no principle, like an intervallic principle in behind, like in Tonband. And I always wanted to write something with the organs and with these organs, because I'm in love with these organs, and for me they are a very special instrument, because I never would have written them or constructed them if not for Enno. So that's the proper. I don't know, are they mine? Okay, I wrote them, but I never would have wrote them without Enno having the ideas for them. So this is on one side an instrument which is very close because I made it, but nevertheless it's coming from a different world, because it's coming rather from Enno's music than from mine.
Then what was the context for which you... Sorry, what, Russell?
Is Enno Dracula? No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, that's you said that. You have to answer that.
And what was the context that you built these organs for?
Oh, several pieces of him. Basically, it was Interzone, I guess, where we started writing organs. Yeah. And since then, he was using them a lot. And
that's what these organs were developed for Salz, pieces like Fleisch. The Fleisch organ, and the last piece was Rundfunk, what was this 1 hour of only the organ. So that was kind of, the finish of that.
Enno, do you want to talk a little bit about your own aesthetic disposition towards electronics generally? I mean, I know your ensemble is a very hybrid ensemble of acoustic and electronic, and I think we're past a point of the musique concrète versus kind of conversation, but I think the way composers work with electronics is still is unique to the composer and your approach to it as an instrument or as a field. So you have these organs and you have the kind of work that's going on in Tonband. What's the difference between them?
Yeah, it's two different things. I think the work with the ensemble and so our working with electronics as a musician is just super interesting for me, because you can do tons of millions and infinitely possibilities of doing things with electronics. For me, that's just as research, and it's normal. So I love that. I just love it because we find all the time interesting things working with composers and different electronic approaches. So I think, for example, in our ensemble, it's absolutely clear that one of the musicians only plays the electronics because we need that all the time. For my own pieces, I thought just, that, for example, the piano, people are practicing the piano since their childhood. So they have manual on the hands, are able to do things what with a computer you can never do, because you have no chance to go to find the similar way of being trained. Like, for example, if you use the volume pedal, there's no musician who can play the volume pedal, because no one starts as a child with 6-year-old playing the volume pedal, because it's just kind of it's really complicated. And that's interesting. So I just use the manual, the possibilities, and sure, I was interested. I think I was interested first in microtonality, and the idea of writing microtonal music, that came just to microtonal keyboard. So I think the direction was not first to write an electronic piece, but I wanted microtonal stuff and super fast microtonal stuff. So I wanted really high speed microtonality, and that was the easiest and best solution to use microtonal keyboards. And starting with this keyboard stuff, sure, there were more possibilities. And just my love for these electric organs, it's just love. That's just kind of a nostalgia. Yeah, I don't know. I just love the sound. It's just great.
And Wolf, can I throw the same question to you? So you're an instrument builder and electronics designer and composer. Do you want to talk about how those worlds kind of integrate for you?
I mean, we share an interest in electroacoustics that for physicality. So that the organs I built, they usually in the studio, they never sound good. They're always too dry, and they have this kind of clinical approach. And they're great in the hall because they make they make a hall resonate. I'm not sure whether did you play the piece live once, or it's still basically existing as only as a recording?
It's coming up in this summer. Finally, we had to postpone last summer for obvious reasons. But yeah, we're gonna finally give the premiere this coming summer.
Yeah.
So you probably will experience what I mean with the when the hall starts vibrating, and for other, I made a lot of pieces where I use prepared loudspeakers, basically, for instance, drums that the loudspeakers are built inside of drums or on cymbals and on metal sheets, which start resonating. So that's a little bit, where did I start? I forgot where I wanted to go. So physicality is a little bit my thing with electroacoustics.
Makes sense.
That's a perfect segue. If you don't mind, because I realize this might be a little bit of a spoiler alert, I'd like to play the end of the piece where there's a kind of physical reveal that comes in. But only with your permission, because the audience, once they know what's coming, you can never take that away.
It's all right. Okay. I'm not too worried.
Go for it.
Do it.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for a good acoustic reveal. I love that's the same reason I love the transition between movement 2 and movement 3 of Tone Bond. I love the entry of the voice at this moment in the piece.
You need a microphone for that, don't you? Just to have a good mix, just to
You're
sing.
right.
You have fewer. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that movement? Why introduce the voice?
Yeah, exactly for that. What you described, that reveal. That's opening in a completely different world. You don't expect it, and it's very weird. Also, this way of singing, this kind of non-tonal or non-even temperate.
For Yarnwire,
to be honest, it's really just for the effect, or just because it's
great
nice.
Effect.
So it's,
were you guys, and I hope this doesn't come across as insulting, but were you attempting to sing microtonally away from the glissando while you were doing it, or were you trying to match?
Let's just say we each have different levels of skill in
as
matching
singers,
pitch
yes.
and as singers. So it's but we kind of, I mean, the music, at least, and we may be wrong and we might learn something here. Like it seemed to support like a lot of different ways of approaching it. And I feel like it's something I want to explore more as we get to perform it live. We kind of prepared this for the recording. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see how it will develop and how we are going to play it live. Like you're right, Enno, we're going to need mics. And so, we overdubbed that, full disclosure, in the recording. And so when we do it in person, where's the mic going to go? How are we going to approach it? How are we going to, do it live? And I think it may come out worse. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it might be unintentionally even more microtonal.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, but that's absolutely no problem. And by the way, even at least try to just do it without microphones and just sing very loud.
Yeah, okay. We'll do that.
I don't want to. It's not about the singing.
Right.
It's about
the. Yeah.
There's a kind of beauty of being wrong, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's glued together pretty well with what you play. So you can't possibly go wrong there.
I feel like if it was like a trained sound, the effect would actually be very different.
Yeah.
And not as spooky, not as goth in a way,
Yeah. Definitely.
Well, I think this is an extraordinary set of pieces recorded in one of the nicest sounding recording environments on the continent, and with some of the nicest instruments available. And even Russell, I have to admit that the sound of the bass drum, the MPAC bass drum, I was a little nostalgic hearing that bass drum.
That's right.
It's such a beautiful bass drum. Yeah. So I hope everybody checks it out on Virgo. When's the release?
The release is not clear, but we hope soon.
Yeah. Okay. Well, soon we will. Soon.
This year.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll make a big deal about it when it comes out for sure.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Enno, and thank you, Wolf. It's been really, really lovely chatting with you, and thank you, Yarnwire, for having me involved in this conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks. And thanks to you, Nick, for leading us twice in conversation with these wonderful friends and collaborators. We're just so thrilled. And Wolf and Enno, we can't wait to see you again in the real world. Like so many people, but really, truly, it's going to be wonderful when we get to reunite someday. And again, thanks to all of you who are watching and following us here in the feedback series. Our next episode is coming up next week, Thursday the 29th, and we'll be talking with another fabulous electronic musician, Marcus Schmickler, who will be joining us with Andrew Fenchel. As always, if you'd like to support this work that we do for feedback, check us out over at patreon.com, where you can get cool rewards in exchange for your support. And follow our channel. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.